Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. I hope you all had a good Christmas. Mine wasn't too bad. I ended up spending the morning with my side of the family. We went over to my grandparents' place, had a lovely breakfast, exchanged our gifts, and then for the evening time, I was over at the in-laws doing dinner with them and then exchanging gifts with them. A lot of running around, but it was a good day all in all for me. For me, actually, Christmas is something a little bit different, and I'm sure it is for a lot of other people out there who aren't religious. Being the fact that Christmas is primarily a Christian holiday celebrating the birth of Jesus, it doesn't really hold much meaning to somebody who doesn't believe in that. So you kind of have to make your own reason to celebrate Christmas, I find. And for me, it's about spending time with family and friends. I guess I would compare it. I guess the best way I compare it would be a second Thanksgiving, where I'm very happy to be around everybody. Just you get older and you realize that you don't have as much time to see everybody you want, your friends, your family. Life takes over. That's happened. Me and my brother used to spend a lot of time together, but just life has taken over these last few years and we don't get to see each other nearly as much. He's also gone at school for 4 years over in the Maritimes, so that also played a factor into why we didn't see each other for a little bit. So I like Christmas for that reason. It's a time where I get to have another bond with my family. No matter what's going on with us in our personal lives or going on even amongst ourselves, because times you have some friction with your family members. It's a time when all that can just be washed away for one day where we can all just spend time together and really enjoy our presence with each other. And I'm sure that's what it means for a lot of people. A lot of other people that I've spoken to who don't believe in God, they've said that it's pretty much what it is for them. It's about spending time with family. And for me, I don't even really care. I don't care about the religious overtone that comes along with Christmas. I enjoy certain Christmas songs as long as they're done by certain artists. I don't like the type of Christmas songs they get just regularly play on the radio. I'm very picky. But I enjoy those songs when they're done properly by good musicians. And I don't really care if they have some religious overtone inside the song itself. However, to say that Christmas is purely about the birth of Jesus these days would be complete bullshit, because as we can tell over the last 60, 70 years, it's been co-opted by capitalism and is become all about how much you can buy for somebody, how much can you spend during the holiday season. It's really been commercialized. It's kind of sad to see that it was supposed to be a holiday celebrating something good one time a year where everybody, even with people you don't know, you can be very good to them. You can be nice and kind to them, which we don't do very often. People are, especially in this side of the earth, we're always on the go. We always got to get to work or do this or do that. So it's very easy to just snap at each other, especially when it's somebody we don't know. And it's very easy to, be a dick to somebody you don't know. So it's nice to have one time a year where we work at it. We work to make sure that we are better people, although plenty don't. There's still a lot of dicks around the Christmas time of year. So it's too bad to see that these days, when you think of Christmas, you think of Walmart or Best Buy or one of these giant tech companies or just corporations that are telling you that the only way for you to properly spend Christmas is to spend $400 on a laptop for your child or your brother or whoever. Or whatever they'll advertise their TVs. It's not about just buying a little something for somebody. It's not about getting them a small $20 gift, $30 gift, maybe $50 if you want to go a little bit higher. It's not about that anymore, where it was just getting somebody a little something. Now it's about how much money can you spend. So it's a little sad to see. And that is the one thing that comes with capitalism. I've mentioned before that if of all the systems that work, I'll take a capitalist system for sure. But unfortunately, this is one of the things that comes with capitalism. Everything becomes about money, everything's about materialism, and that's what Christmas has become. And I really don't think that's going to change anytime soon, so there's probably not a point in complaining about it. But boy, if you are an anti-Trudeau guy, you really got a Christmas present this year, didn't you? On December 20th, 5 days before Christmas, the ethics commissioner ended up dropping the Trudeau Report. Now, this report was the ethics commissioner's investigation into Justin Trudeau about the trip that he took last Christmas to Aga Khan's island. As we know, Justin Trudeau ended up going to Aga Khan's island, and a lot of people were saying, and rightfully so, that this was a conflict of interest because of, number one, Aga Khan has done a lot of involvement with the Canadian government throughout the years, all sorts of Canadian governments. In fact, the Harper government actually made it easier for Aga Khan and his foundations to lobby the government. So he has a lot of history with the Canadian government. Justin Trudeau has in fact known Aga Khan for a long time. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was actually the very first connection between Aga Khan and the Trudeau family. At the time, a man known as Idi Amin had just become the new president of Uganda. And for those who have seen the movie The Last King of Scotland, this movie dealt directly with that man and his genocide that he did. He genocided the Ugandan people. I think by the end of it, there was about 300,000 people that were dead underneath his dictatorial rule. And in this movie, it's about a doctor from Great Britain, and he goes to Uganda at first just to help out in the villages, and then he comes across Idi Amin and ends up helping him once, I can't remember what happened, I think he got injured during a hunt or something like that. So he helps them. Idi Amin takes him on as his personal physician. And as this is going on, as this guy stays on as Idi Amin's physician over the years, he's starting to see the change in the country. He's starting to hear the stories of people dying, people disappearing, mutilations, terrible shit, all happening at the command of Idi Amin. But now he's stuck because he can't get out of the country without going through Idi Amin's official government forces and without Idi Amin finding out, but he's also scared for his life. At the same time, he's having an affair with one of Idi Amin's wife, which was not a fucking good idea, and impregnated her. So that was what the movie was about. So during this going on, and this whole crisis going on in Uganda, this is when Aga Khan ended up moving to Canada. He ended up talking to the Trudeau government, and the Trudeau government, Trudeau Sr., ended up bringing him over. And he is actually the current imam of the Ismaili Muslims. And he was, at the time when this crisis went on, he was the one who lobbied Trudeau's government to bring him and the rest of those Muslims over, which they did. So Trudeau Sr. was the one who brought him into Canada. And from there, this is when Aga Khan built himself up. Now, some people have criticized the way he's built himself up because he has received a lot of government donations over the years, but one of the things people are really criticizing him for, he's being criticized because the Ismaili Muslim population has to donate up to 10% of their gross annual income to their imam, so going to Aga Khan. Now, Aga Khan has said that this has been used in turn for philanthropist projects in order to help the Ismaili community both in Canada and abroad. However, many have also said that there's a lot of corruption inside the Ismaili Muslim, inside their community because of this reason, and sometimes people are forced to give more, and the fact that the imams can become very greedy and to take it for themselves. It sounds actually very familiar to the way that the chiefs on the Native Reserves Act is that a lot of their population lives in poverty, yet these chiefs who take all the money from the government and give very little of it back out live quite well. And this is almost what it's sounding like. So there's been some criticizing of Aga Khan for that reason, saying that maybe this is the way he's built himself up to become the billionaire that he is today. Now, of course, that wouldn't be everything. He would not become this rich just by these donations, but it definitely would be a damn good start to get yourself started on whatever companies or foundations that Aga Khan has. And while Aga Khan is not registered as a lobbyist, the Aga Khan Foundation Canada is actually registered to lobby several different departments of the government, including the Prime Minister's office. So after he came to Canada, Aga Khan developed a relationship with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, our current Prime Minister's father. And after a while, after about, I think sometime around the year of 1983, Justin Trudeau did not see Aga Khan until up till about 2013, 2014 on a personal basis. There were a few separate times where he did see him for a short amount of time. One of them being at Pierre Elliott Trudeau's funeral in 2000, where Aga Khan was a pallbearer. And then a couple times when Aga Khan was coming to meet the government, Trudeau was sort of the liaison to go meet him because of their relationship, but they would not have extended interaction. This has actually been confirmed. However, what ended up happening in this situation was the fact that after him and Aga Khan started getting back into contact at about 2014, roughly, it was just after Trudeau became the leader of the Liberal Party. Sorry about that. The leader of the Liberal Party is about the time when Aga Khan started getting back in contact with them. It all began because Aga Khan was congratulating Justin Trudeau on their win, and then, of course, he had business to do with the government, so they had plenty of other contacts through there. So in 2014, Aga Khan did invite Justin Trudeau to come out to his private island along with his wife and kids, which Justin Trudeau did. He went out, and there was no problems there. What the problem was in this situation is a couple of different things. The problem in this situation had to do with how much business Aga Khan did with the government and with the Liberals having a majority government in-house right now. So a lot of people, especially the Conservatives, really felt uneasy by this relationship, especially considering how Aga Khan and Justin Trudeau were buddying enough to go to private islands together. This would probably not look good for a lot of Conservatives when he was the Liberal Party leader, but now that he's the Prime Minister, for them, they have much more reason to be concerned about something like that. And it turned out they did, because Aga Khan, at the time, was lobbying the Canadian government. So they had personal business open when Justin Trudeau took this trip to go to the private island. He accepted a helicopter ride that was completely unnecessary, as they stated in this report. They said that he had every means to get there, but he took this personal helicopter ride, which could be seen as a bribe. Now, for a long time, Justin Trudeau was pushing back at this, talking about how Aga Khan was a long-time friend. He's like, it's not a big deal. We've known each other for a long time, blah, 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 blah. While, yes, their family has been connected, Aga Khan's mostly had a connection through Pierre Elliott Trudeau rather than through Justin Trudeau, who was a kid the last time that he saw Aga Khan, really. And then I think from about 83 or so. And then from there, he didn't see him again until about 2000, and then from there, not really until about 2013, 2014. So there's been a huge gap in their relationship, yet he talks about how close they are as friends. Now, I understand that family friends do have a connection together and can be longtime friends. However, it is a little suspicious that this is the point where Trudeau is starting to get these invites back into the island once again. And he got an invite from Aga Khan very soon after they remade contact back in about 2013, 2014. About Christmas of 2014 is when he took the trip. So it was sometime in the year of about 2014 when the trip was offered to him. And then that was the first time he went to the island along with his family. Now, on these other trips that were made to the island, it wasn't actually Justin Trudeau himself who went, but his wife took the kids, and they ended up going to stay for a while, along with a bunch of other friends that Aga Khan tended to have at this island. He tended to have a lot of friends at this island. It was only his wife and kids that went. He had business elsewhere. And then on December of 2016 is when Justin Trudeau took that trip to the island with his wife. And this is what everybody is starting to get on about. But despite this, and Trudeau making the claim that it was no big deal, it was just an old friend inviting him out to the island, it became clear that Aga Khan had business dealings that were open at the time when Trudeau accepted this. He was found guilty of violating sections 5, 11, 12, and 21 of the Conflict of Interest Act. Members of Parliament are guided under this Conflict of Interest Act as well as the Members' Code. And he was in violation of both of these when he did this. Now, the sections that he was in violation for, we'll take a quick look through. So the first one that they said, he is in violation of Section 5. and that is every public office holder shall arrange his or her private affairs in a manner that will prevent the public office holder from being in a conflict of interest. And the Ethics Commissioner concluded that he contravened Section 5 for failing to arrange his private affairs to avoid such an opportunity. He said he violated Section 11, Paragraph 1, which is no public office holder or member of his or her family shall accept any gift or other advantage, including from a trust, that might reasonably be seen as been given to influence the public office holder in the exercise of official power, duty, or function. The Ethics Commissioner ended up saying that I found that Mr. Trudeau, as Prime Minister, contravened Section 11 of the Act when he and his family accepted gifts of hospitality from Aga Khan and the use of his private island in March and December of 2016. As well, the Foundation was registered to lobby the office of the Prime Minister at that time. And one thing that became questionable in this section was whether that Justin Trudeau had violated Paragraph 1 or whether he was protected under what Paragraph 2 of Section 11, Paragraph 2 of the Act. So this section, the Section 11, Paragraph 2, says, despite subsection 1, a public office holder or member of his or her family may accept a gift or other advantage if A, is permitted under the Canada Elections Act, B, that is given by a relative or friend, or C, that is received as a normal expression of courtesy or protocol, or is within the customary standards that normally accept the public office holder's position. So if we look at this and look at that, it was B, it says a gift that is given by a relative or a friend. This is what Justin Trudeau was using in order to protect himself. He was saying that Aga Khan was a friend and he invited me out to his island. So this would protect him. However, the Ethics Commission, when she looked into it, didn't accept this for two reasons. One, because there was business opened between Aga Khan's lobbying commission and the government, and B, because it had been so long between the times that Justin Trudeau had seen Aga Khan, that he had known him when he was a kid, then had a huge gap of about 20 years where he didn't see him, saw him briefly at his father's funeral, and then once or twice briefly in the 2010s up till about 2014, roughly 2013, 2014. So because of this large gap, and how they just gotten back in contact when this sort of invitation was extended, she didn't accept it as it being his friend. That just him being a friend is unacceptable as an answer, as a defense in this situation, and he is in fact in violation of Section 11, Paragraph 1. He also violated Section 12, which is no minister of the Crown, minister of the state, or parliamentary secretary, no member of his or her family, or ministerial advisor or ministerial staff shall accept travel or non-commercial chartered or private aircraft for any purpose unless required in his or her capacity as a public office holder or in exceptional circumstances or with the prior approval of the commissioner. And the Ethics Commissioner ended up saying, I found that Mr. Trudeau contravened Section 12 of the Act when his family traveled on non-commercial aircraft chartered by the Aga Khan in March 2016, and when he and his family traveled in the Aga Khan's private helicopter in December 2016. The travel was not required in Mr. Trudeau's official capacity as a public office holder, and he did not seek my prior approval. Furthermore, I found that the circumstances were not exceptional for Mr. Trudeau in this case. And finally, Section 21, which says, a public office holder shall recuse himself or herself from any discussion, decision, debate, or vote on any matter in respect to which he or she would be in a conflict of interest. And the Ethics Commissioner said, I found that Mr. Trudeau contravened Section 21 of the Act when he did not recuse himself from discussions that provide an opportunity to improperly further the private interests associated with one of the institutions of the Aga Khan. Yeah, he's known as the Aga Khan because he's been recognized as royalty amongst the, actually by the British royals. So he is now the Aga Khan. Ooh. And then it listed out inside the report all the times that either Trudeau or his family, or all of them, ended up going to this island. And it said in December 2014, the family vacation on the island. This was the time that included Justin Trudeau. And it says on March 11, 2016, Ms. Gregoire Trudeau, a friend of hers, and their children arrived on the island for a week-long trip. Mid-July 2016, Ms. Gregoire Trudeau contacted the Aga Khan's daughter and inquired whether her family would be able to vacation on Bell's Cay at Christmas. That is the island. Mr. Trudeau said they chose to vacation at Bell Cay as it it offered security and privacy for himself and for his family. And then December 26, 2016 to January 4th, 2017, Mr. Trudeau and his family and their friends spent their Christmas holidays on Bell's Quay along with the Aga Khan, his children, and their families. The Trudeau family exchanged Christmas gifts with the Aga Khan and his family. Mr. Trudeau said that other guests, including a senior American official of a previous administration and friends of those other guests, were also present. So Christmas came early for us Andrew Trudeau people, and because the ethics commissioner found him guilty on this, this would be the first time in Canadian history where the prime minister was found guilty of violating the code of ethics and found guilty by the ethics commissioner. Holy shit! Now, the thing about this is a very similar circumstance to the video that I put out on YouTube a few days ago. Because I didn't end up posting it to iTunes because it was just a quick video talking about what ended up happening with the Young Turks. And essentially, Cenk Uygur got found out that back in the past, a little bit before he started TYT and after TYT, that he made a bunch of sexist remarks and some racist remarks, mostly sexist, I would say, and some were claiming pro-rape. And the situation was similar with TYT as it is for Justin Trudeau right now, is that no one's going to really, from the other side, it wants to give you the benefit of the doubt because these are people that have for a long time taken the moral high ground. And then once they get found out, they have a large lashback because for a long time, for instance, let's take the Young Turk situation, they have talked about how the right is sexist and racist and how terrible they are. And then we're hearing that Cenk Uygur has said all these terrible things while being a progressive, as well as the co-founder of TYT also held similar sentiments as he wrote on an online post back in 2005 about an 8-day road trip that him and Cenk took. So there was a lot of lashback for them, and there's a lot of lashback for Justin Trudeau because he calls himself a feminist and talks about how terrible, men are and how racist the country is. He talks about how we're being the rich 1% are stealing from us. Meanwhile, he's taxing the middle class and he's taxing them a lot. So there's a bunch of reasons to criticize him, and just watch as he stood on the high ground and said, look how terrible you are. Meanwhile, he's violating ethics rules, and he's the one that's actually taking private bribes, and he's the one that is associated with rich business people. And then it's also coming out that inside the Prime Minister's office, there's a lot of sexual harassment complaints coming out. So this is the same situation that nobody is going to want to give Trudeau the benefit of the doubt. No one wants to give TYT the benefit of the doubt because they're giant fucking hypocrites. So now I'm talking about everybody who pays attention to politics and takes an interest in that. Nobody in there is going to give you the benefit of the doubt. But right now, the media is not really talking much about this. Essentially, Justin Trudeau gave his apology, and that was more than enough for a lot of people. In fact, let's go watch his apology right now.
That I should have taken precautions and cleared my family vacation and dealings with the Aga Khan in advance. I'm sorry I didn't. And in the future, I will be clearing all my family vacations with the Commissioner's office. I've always considered the Aga Khan a close family friend, which is why I didn't clear this family trip in the first place. But given the Commissioner's report, I will be taking all precautions in the future. Happy to take your questions.
So he gives his apology. I'm surprised he didn't end up crying like he likes to do so much during these apologies or these press conferences. He loves bringing out the waterworks. But then a lot of people afterwards on social media, some inside the mainstream media, are saying essentially, well, he's apologized, so it's time to move on. They say it's no big deal. It's time to move on. No, this is a big deal. It shows that our Prime Minister took bribes. He is the first one in history to break the rules of the ethics commissioner, and the mainstream media hated Harper. They fucking hated Harper, but they couldn't even get Harper on a violation by the ethics commissioner. But Trudeau can. The man who posed himself as the golden boy, as the one who's going to make everything okay. The one that all the anti-Trump Americans say, oh my God, I wish he could be our president. I wish he could be our leader. He's so dreamy. Yeah, except that's all he's fucking good for. He's good for on a goddamn poster. But aside for that, he's got fucking nothing. He's useless. He barely has a brain inside his body. He does not have the experience with the common day people. He acts like he does, but he has next to no experience with them. He was born rich, he lived rich, he's only worked part-time as like a goddamn assistant drama teacher or something like that. Something so insignificant it doesn't even matter. And then you go out for goddamn leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada? How did we vote this guy in? Are we that fucking stupid? But what bugs me the most is just that nothing's going to come out of this. He's going to pay a small fine. It'll be back to business as usual. It'll get buried amongst all the other news stories, and nobody's going to remember. When the election comes up in a couple of years, are people going to be talking about how Justin Trudeau was the first prime minister in history to violate the ethics commissioner? Probably not. I highly doubt that's going to be coming up. But meanwhile, in something like Harper's case, it was always everything he did over his entire time in office came up during the election time. Are we going to do the same thing for Trudeau? Because his record is just as bad as Harper's, at least just as bad as Harper's. Are we going to do that? Are we going to go through the history of Justin Trudeau to everything he's done and all the bullshit policies he's pushed, all the dangerous policies he's pushed? Are we going to do that? Probably not. Probably not. So while I'm here, before we move on to our next story, and because I kind of brought it up already, I just wanted to quickly address this video that I put out, because now I want to talk about it because it was very polarizing, as clearly it showed from the like-to-dislike ratio. It was very polarizing. A lot of people didn't like what had to be said. Some people did like what had to be said in my video. It's just a quick response video I wanted to put out because I had listened to TYT for a long time, about 2 years or so, maybe 3 almost. They were the news source that I watched a lot. So when this sort of hypocrisy came out, that Cenk Uygur had put all these had put all these things online or said these things, I felt like I had to respond to it just because I was a long-time TYT fan. If you even want to call me a fan, I don't even like saying that, but just that's what they seem to call themselves. They call themselves TYT fans, I guess. But anyway, I watched them for a long time, and I thought they were the good news source to go to. I know. Give me a lot of hate for that. I understand. So I felt very betrayed once I started, getting out of my left-wing bubble, and I started looking into stuff for myself, and I started looking into what other people were saying about the Young Turks and how they could be very dishonest in their reporting. So I always felt I was always a little bit pissed off that I bought into it, that I bought into them. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to put out the video. And it was very polarizing for a lot of people. A lot of people were saying that it was just, there was no big deal. Essentially, they were criticizing me because I was bringing all this back up, that I was saying, well, here's what Cenk said back in 1999. Here's what he said in 2003. Here's what was said in 2005. People didn't like that, saying that the guy has admitted he owned up to it. He did own up to it, and that he's admitted he was more immature and everything. He apologized. So why you bring this back up? And it's because for a long time, actually ever since the founding of TYT, Cenk Uygur and the rest of them has looked out and talked about how everyone else is sexist and racist. And then it finally comes out that they hold those attitudes themselves. It was a little bit bittersweet, if you want, because you don't actually want to celebrate somebody going down like that and turning out to be a piece of shit like that. But at the same time, it's like, you sat there, you criticized, and you turned out to be a huge hypocrite. So I'm not really willing to give him the same benefit of the doubt. Maybe I would have been willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But in his apology, he apologized the first part and he owned up to it. And then in the second part, he blames it on being young, but says, I was a Republican at the time. I was a conservative at the time. And that's not good enough for me when he says that, because while he does talk about it being a Republican when he was until up about college, when he says it that way, he's blaming it on the fact that he was right-wing, the fact that he was Republican, the fact that he was conservative. And he's not actually owning up to that was who he was, that he was that person. He was saying, I was that person because I was a conservative. So I didn't like that excuse. I did not like that excuse at all. And I'm not even on the right, but I don't think that racism, sexism, and all that shit falls on one side of the aisle. You can be on the left or the right or the middle, and you can be one of these things, sexist, racist, whatever. So this is why I was not willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And amongst all the comments telling me how stupid I was, I actually wanted to address one comment because the person wrote it out very well. I actually really liked what they said, and they made a good point. Even I'll say they made a good point. This person ended up saying, I'm confused. It seems you want to discredit everything that comes out of Cenk's mouth because he used to have some opinions that he admits were completely retarded. That doesn't make sense to me. Isn't learning and evolving what we want from everyone? And I'm not even a big Cenk fan. He's way too emotional for me in a lot of issues. But when I'm dealing with Trump, Shapiro, Cenk, or anyone else, I don't just kill the man. I agree with the opinions that make sense, and I disagree with the dumb ones. Cenk is right that we need to take money out of politics. He's wrong about transgenderism, pretty much across the board. So that was the response. Very well written and actually a great argument. I think that was well said. And I want to address, because first off, when it came to that last part, just the last part real quick, I was going to address, because he says, I agree with Cenk getting money out of politics. I think there was some confusion there, because during the video, I ended up putting up the debate between Ben Shapiro and Cenk Uygur at the part where Ben Shapiro ended up turning Cenk Uygur's insult about money and politics being prostitution into calling Cenk Uygur a prostitute. And I thought it was very funny. And I thought at the time when I watched it, I pissed myself laughing. Like back a few months ago when they were debating, I pissed myself laughing. So that's why I put it up, just because I thought it was funny. But I did say in that video where I covered the debate, and I'll say it again now, I actually in that situation did agree with Cenk over Ben Shapiro. I agree that money did have to be taken out of American politics, or at the very least, a cap has to be put on how much can be donated, because it's all out of control right now. But there was some confusion there because of that clip, I think. So I actually do agree with Cenk on that, and I didn't think that Ben Shapiro's argument of money equaling speech was convincing. So I actually just wanted to clarify that. And I will say that it definitely did sound like I was trying to discredit everything that came out of Cenk's mouth. I will admit to owning up to that. I did do that. I normally don't. I really don't try and conduct myself that way. I think I kind of did that time, and it was the wrong thing to do. And I will own up to some resentment towards TYT and Cenk. I have some resentment. Part of the reason I used that clip by Ben Shapiro, even though I agreed with Cenk, is because even at the time I had some resentment towards Cenk for everything. And even now I got some resentment towards Cenk and TYT because I bought into their bullshit. So that was definitely going to have some bias there as the way I took the video. I definitely took in the bias of my resentment. I will own up to that. But normally that's not the way I'm trying to conduct myself. So in summary, the way I took the video, it did have bias in it, I will admit that. I was fueled a little bit by resentment, but mostly I wanted to inform people on this and put my opinion forward, because this is something I felt for a while. So it was in a bit of a way for me to let out some steam. And then finally, on top of that, the reason I am giving Cenk such a hard time for these comments that were made 12 years ago or more. Well, we're looking for 12 to 18 years, because they kind of range roughly. If we're looking at that, then the reason I'm not giving the benefit of the doubt is because Cenk has done this to countless people on his show. He has dug up old messages and used it to pretty much slander them, assault them, and say that they deserve whatever they get. Maybe not quite in those words, that's still putting it more harsh than what Cenk says, but essentially he won't disown it, and he's done stuff like this before. So it is hypocritical, and it is biased. I will admit that video was a bit hypocritical and biased, but that is what I was doing. More than anything, I was venting about my feelings over the last few years. So I just wanted to at least own up to that, because I'm sure Some people think that I was being hypocritical in that situation and probably being unfair. But all in all, I stand by what I said in the video. I'll just admit to some of the places I came from from my angle when I made that video. So one big thing that the Canadian, both the media and the government, have been campaigning for recently had to do with hate crimes and racism, such as Islamophobia. That's been the big one, actually, in Canada. I know it's a big one all around the world, but in Canada, that's been a particular one for sure, especially with the motion of M103 that came out, which back at the beginning, about February of this year, roughly, was when it was introduced. It was introduced in December, and then it was passed in February. And the motion was for the Canadian government to look into Islamophobia in Canada. This caused a big backlash amongst Canadians from all over. Mainly it had to do with that Islamophobia wasn't a well-defined term. That people say Islamophobia, what constitutes Islamophobia has always been the big thing. So there was a big controversy. People on both sides, you have the people saying that were against M103 and then other people that were saying it was supposed to protect Muslims from hate crimes. But essentially, it's just a motion, so all it would do is saying the Canadian government needs to look into this. Motions don't really do much. Sometimes some stuff comes out of it, but a lot of people have called them just government virtue signals, essentially. Just this, they'll put it forward just to say, look, we're doing something, but really they don't do anything. But that being said, there's been a lot of talk about Islamophobia. There's been a lot of talk of hate crimes in Canada. However, every time I look into it, I've noticed that people always take it the wrong way or spin those statistics in a different way. Because one thing that the people will have you believe, especially in Canada, is that Islamophobia is on the rise. Islamophobia is everywhere in Canada right now. We really need to get a stem on this Islamophobia. In fact, just before Christmas happened, Kathleen Wynne, the Premier of Ontario, gave a speech. I can't remember off the top of my head where she was. It was a convention for some Islamic convention. Now, over the years, we've seen rises and falls in different types of hate crimes against different type of people. Of course, there have been times where the Muslim population have been targeted. In fact, in 2015 in Canada, this would be one time where we did see a giant spike from 2014 in crimes that were committed against Muslims. And this was well reported back in 2016 when these numbers were coming out. A lot of people were talking about it. Or I guess it was close to this 2017. Usually it's about the end of the year when the statistics come out from the year before. Like, we just got 2016 statistics released. So people talked about how 2015, there was a rise in hate crimes against Muslims, which there was. In 2014, there was about 99 reported incidents to police of hate crimes against Muslims, and then in 2015, it rose to 159. So we went from 8% one year to 12% the next year. So without a doubt, there was a rise, and this will happen for sure. But people always take the wrong approach on this, and here's a good one. Yes, hate crimes did rise for Muslims, without a doubt. But did you know that the Jewish population still was targeted more than that? But then when it's reported, people say that hate crimes against Jews were lowered, but it still took up about 13% of hate crimes that were reported. And this has been true pretty consistently throughout the years in Canada. The Jewish population, which is in fact one of the smallest populations, not only in Canada, but in the world. There's only, 20 million Jewish people, I believe, worldwide? Something around there? So it's a very small population, yet in Canada, they've always been one of the groups that have been targeted the most. But no politician ever talks about that. They always talk about the problems that the Muslim population faces. The problem when we compare these statistics and we kind of break them down a little bit is when you're dealing with numbers. Even though we had 13% for the Jews in 2015, and then we had in 12% of Muslims were reported as being that were the victims of hate crime in 2015, the number of Muslims in Canada, the population, is significantly higher. When we're dealing with the smaller numbers of the Jewish population compared to the higher numbers of the Muslim population, Suddenly, when you commit 13% of the hate crime attacks against the Jewish population, you've actually targeted a greater population of people. You targeted a greater percentage of people. But nobody ever wants to talk about the hate crimes against the Jews. No one's talking about anti-Semitism, really. It kind of popped up a little bit in December in Canadian newspapers because there were a few synagogues that were getting hate messages that were sent to them. And this is probably in response to what Donald Trump did when he said that he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I'm sure this is some hate crimes that were in response to this of people who were pissed off. However, sometimes hate crimes are committed by people from the community in order to get sympathy or make another group look bad. So we'll have to wait and see. Right now, I'll take it and say that they are being threatened, but we always need to wait and see if there's more to the stories. Because a lot of times, as the investigation goes down, we learn there is a different angle to the story than we originally thought. And I think a good example, though, of how the media doesn't report this in an honest light, essentially, is why I would say an honest light, is if we look at an article that was put forward by BuzzFeed about this. This article is a few months old, but then they were dealing with the 2015 statistics at the time because the 2016 hate crime report only came out at the beginning of December or so. And there's supposed to be more released come the new year. So they only could deal with the 2015 stats at the time. But if we were dealing with the 2015, 2014, and even a little bit previous to that, we actually can see that it's always the Jews that get targeted more than the Muslim population. And when in terms of violent hate crimes, it's actually the LGBT community that gets targeted the most with violent assaults. But in this article, it says there are 159 police reported hate crimes against Muslims in 2015, the last year for which StatsCan had full figures. Again, they didn't have the 2016 stats at the time. The number of hate crimes targeting Muslims has increased each year since 2012, where there were 45 incidents. That's 253% increase over 4 years. And as StatsCan reported, because BuzzFeed sent you a link to the StatsCan report, as it says police reported hate crimes targeting the Muslim population increased from 99 incidents in 2014 to 159 incidents in 2015, an increase of 61%. At the same time, the number of police reported crimes targeting the Jewish population declined from 2013 to 2014 to 178 in 2015. So it went down from 213 to 178. See, these are still big numbers when we're talking about it, because we talk about how, it's gone up in 2015. It went up to 159 crimes reported. This is still significantly less than what was being reported against the Jews the year before. There was 99 there was Jews the year before was 213, and the Muslims targeted 99%. This is a big disparaging difference. And again, the Jews is a much smaller population group than compared to the Muslims that we have around. So if we're talking about these hate crimes per capita, the Jews generally will have a higher per capita of hate crimes committed against them than the Muslims. But the way that BuzzFeed takes this article is they take it on, look how terrible this is in Canada for it to be Muslim, essentially. It's increased 253% from 2012 to 2015. Now, they took that number directly to say from 2012 to 2015 because that way they can make it look like a very big number, of course. However, we also need to take in consideration what's going on at the time on the global scale, because at the time in 2015 we were facing a economic crisis, and a lot of people were unhappy with how it was being handled with, and a lot of people had fears of what was going on. So I actually think it's almost natural that there would be more increased crimes in something like this, especially considering how in 2015 we took on a lot of refugees. And they got thrown into these areas. So it's very likely that there were real reasons why this happened more and more. Not saying that they are acceptable reasons, but as people felt that they were either being forced out or people felt that they were being forced to adapt to someone else, these sort of resentment sentiments would happen. But then in 2016, those hate crimes against the Muslims went down. The hate crime statistics went down for the Muslim population and once again increased for the Jewish population. Because as we look at the 2016 numbers, There were 221 hate crimes reported to the police against the Jewish population, and there were 139 that were reported to police against the Muslim population. So suddenly, the Jews are being targeted 16%, the Muslims targeted 10%. So we see as it goes down against the Muslims in 2016, while the Jews, once again, get the short end of the stick. It's also worth mentioning that throughout almost every single one of those years that we're talking about with hate crimes, except for 2015, I believe. Yeah, except for 2015, actually the people had more hate crimes committed against them for their sexual orientation than against the entire Muslim population. And if we're talking about the LGBT and people with concerned about their sexual orientation, then we're talking about a much smaller number once again. This is not going to be as numerous as the Muslim population. So once again, we have a higher per capita of hate crimes committed against the LGBT and the Jewish community than against the Muslim population. Per capitas matter. How many per 100,000 or whatever numbers, those numbers matter. If you have a higher per capita, then that means you, the individual, has a higher chance of X happening. So if you have higher hate crimes committed against your population per capita, then that means you, the individual, has more of a chance of having a hate crime committed against you. So the LGBT and the Jewish population are two populations that we should actually be protecting right now, because those are the ones being most targeted. But instead, we're putting all of our eggs into saying Islamophobia. Sure, it's around. Sure, there's people that don't like Muslims. Of course, there's going to be people that don't like Muslims and people who don't like every sort of person on the earth. There's people who don't like Jews either, and literally every race, every religion. You'll find people that don't like it. But the people that right now really do need our help, the Jewish community and the LGBT community, are being completely left in the wind. Nothing's being done for them. And instead, we're putting all this focus on Islamophobia because it's the hot political topic. It's the hot political topic everyone wants to talk about, and it's one that everyone wants to play as being worse than it is. But the problem is, once again, that nobody is really giving a good definition of Islamophobia. Is criticizing the doctrine of Islam Islamophobic? If I'm criticizing Muhammad because he had a 9-year-old wife, is that being Islamophobic? If I'm being critical because their doctrine says kill the non-believers, does that mean I'm being Islamophobic? And even in a recent global news headline, it said hate crimes against Muslims are down as overall numbers of hate crimes increase. If we look into what the article says, it says a number of police reported hate crimes specifically targeting Muslims went down last year after spiking by over 250% over a 4-year period. According to StatsCan, data released Tuesday, police across the country recorded 139 hate crimes against Muslims in 2016, a rate down from 159 in 2015. LGBTQ targeted hate crimes remain most violent. The spectrum of police reported hate crimes runs the gamut of hateful graffiti or vandalism right up to criminal assaults or even homicide. But overall, year over year, hate crimes in Canada are becoming more violent. Hate crimes based on sexual orientation tend to be the most violent. In 2016, 71% of hate crimes motivated by hatred of the victim's sexual orientation were classified as violent. By comparison, 27% of hate crimes targeting religion and 45% targeting ethnicity were violent. And the same StatCans reported by the Canadian Jewish News talks about how Jews were the most targeted victims of hate crimes in 2016. It said, according to police reported hate crimes in 2016, a document released by StatsCan in November 28, Jews were the victims of 221 hate-motivated crimes, more than blacks, 214, and those targeted because of their sexual orientation, 176. Altogether, police reported 1,409 hate crimes in 2016, 47 more than the year before. StatsCan pointed out that these represent less than 0.1% of all crimes reported by police services. So without a doubt, we need to do something about hate crimes. Absolutely, we need to do something about hate crimes. The problem is that I find, though, is, once again, I think I've already stated, we focus on the wrong things on hate crimes. We're not going after the most violent hate crimes, because otherwise we'd be going after people with who are targeted for their sexual orientation. We're not going after the most persecuted group who had the most crimes committed against them, because then we'd be going after the Jewish community. And even those based on ethnicity were considered had more hate crimes committed against them in 2016 than the Muslims did. I also have a feeling that when they talk about ethnicity, it might not all be actual hate crimes when they were violent, but it could be fights that happen between two different people, two different ethnicities, and it could have been recorded as a hate crime. I think. I'm just taking a guess on this one. But another thing that the BuzzFeed article likes to point to is this talks about how at the beginning of 2017 in Quebec City, was it Quebec City? I think it was Quebec City, but at least the province of Quebec, there was a mosque shooting where 6 Muslims were killed. And, it caused a lot of outrage amongst Canadians. Nobody likes a shooting like that. Of course not. But 6 Muslims were killed in this, and of course it was bad, but these are one of the things that people are pointing to say how terrible and racist Canada is towards Muslims. Well, why don't we talk about the thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women, though? Because here's another group that receives a lot of hate, the Aboriginal Indigenous group. So many of their women are missing, murdered. But we're barely doing anything about that, despite the fact Justin Trudeau promised to do something about that and has pretty much done nothing aside for shuffle his cabinet and remake a few Indigenous services cabinets. It was nothing. He really has not done anything despite his promise. Why don't we focus on this? Here we go. We have actual people that are being ripped from their family, whether that's forever or temporary. We don't know. Many of them, it happens because they go running off trying to escape the reserves for a better life, and they end up getting picked up by somebody who realizes that they're really not going to be missed. Or they're not going to be missed by the right people, the people with the power to actually go after them, to go after the girl, to go looking for the girl. Because the police a lot of times tend to ignore these cases. They just get put on the cold case shelf. So if we're really going to want to target hate crimes, then why don't we go after things like this? The hate crimes of the murdered Indigenous women, of the Jewish communities that are always getting hate threats, vandalism against them, and it happens in great numbers, or those that are being physically assaulted for their sexual orientation. Here's 3 very good ones. But we chose Islamophobia. So there was a hell of a report that got dropped by Politico that was very damning to President Obama and his administration. And this was an article was talking about how Obama let Hezbollah off the hook. How he pretty much let Hezbollah grow from a small-time organization into a global, not only terrorist supporting group, but in fact a global drug dealer, essentially. Because Hezbollah now has got a whole system working around drugs and getting them inside. Because right now Hezbollah has a whole money laundering / drug scheme going on. And the U.S. is the target. In this report, they talked about Project Cassandra, which was a task force put together by the DEA back in 2008. And they were looking into the drugs that were coming into across the borders. Now, as this report goes on to say, it pretty much talked about how at the time Obama was going through his nuclear agreement with Iran, and that he was trying to make sure that was going well as trying to ease some tensions in the Middle East, or at least that's what Obama was trying to do. Whether that was actually successful is another story, and I guess we can kind of tell by the state of the Middle East right now that it wasn't successful. But in doing this, in trying to get this deal with Iran and trying not to ruffle too many feathers with Iran, he let Hezbollah grow. And he let them grow into an international arms dealer, drug dealer, terrorist supporting organization. To the point where Hezbollah is an actual legitimate political party. So the DEA spent a long time using all sorts of information, informants, wiretaps, and anything else they can get their hands on across 30 different U.S. departments in order to get as much information on Hezbollah as possible. And they came across a cocaine, or essentially a giant worldwide cocaine scheme. And as it said, it was talking about how Hezbollah was shipping cocaine from Latin America to West Africa and on to Europe and Middle East, and throughout Venezuela, Mexico, and the United States. Now, essentially how this scheme worked was a giant circle. It would be that the money that was laundered would go in to getting these cars, these cars that were then being transferred all the way back to Africa in order for resale. And during this money that was getting used throughout this resale was going two ways. It was going back in first to funnel the cash flow for Hezbollah, and the rest of it was being used in order to pay and finance Latin American countries to transport their drugs into the U.S., including countries such as Colombia and Venezuela. And of course, you can't talk about smuggling drugs without talking about Mexico in that regard. While this was going on, while the DEA was tracking this all down, it turns out that the Obama administration was putting in blocks every which way in order to stop this. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why? Why would Obama want to stop an investigation into Hezbollah, into possible drug trafficking and weapon trafficking schemes? Well, it's for a couple different reasons, and the main one had to do with Obama really wanted his Iran deal. He really, really, really wanted it. And early on, when the U.S. government was doing deals with Iran, Iran actually specifically told them that they wanted the U.S. to lay off on Hezbollah a little bit. So Obama did. As a show of good faith to the Iranians, he laid off Hezbollah and let them grow. This was about the worst thing he could possibly do, because for a long time, Iran's been the one that everyone's worried about in the Middle East. They're the big power over there. They're the ones that the U.S. They're the one that could actually kind of combat U.S.'s massive power, although U.S. still is a lot stronger than they are. But what now has happened is this has allowed Hezbollah, another smaller time group, to grow and build themselves into a huge military-industrial complex. So now in the Middle East, Iran had the nuclear arms program put in place, and then since then there's been a lot of problems of Iran not following the proper procedure, of even possibly Iran, and actually one was Iran opened, after this was signed, 2 new nuclear plants, and that was known and approved by the Obama administration just before he left office, about the last year or so. So Iran doesn't really have too much countermeasures in place. Sure, it slowed them down on trying to work towards a nuclear weapon as long as they're following the procedures, which of course I'm sure they're trying to get around one way or another. But now on top of that, we have Hezbollah, who have now grown themselves to be quite a good dominating force. And since Iran and Hezbollah have good ties together, this really does not bode well for the US and Western countries. And it certainly does not bode well for Israel. And these blocks towards the investigation were coming from all over. They were coming from Homeland Security, they were coming from the Justice Department, the Treasury Department, they were coming from pretty much Obama himself. No matter which way these people went, they just could not get around Obama's administration trying to prevent them from doing their jobs. This report also talked about how the administration declined requests by Project Cassandra and other authorities to file criminal charges against major players such as Hezbollah's high-profile envoy to Iran, a Lebanese bank that allegedly laundered billions in alleged drug profits, a central player in a U.S.-based cell of Iranian paramilitary Quds Force, and the State Department rejected requests to lure high-value targets to countries where they could be arrested. And as a result of this, it says multi-ton loads of cocaine enter the United States and hundreds of millions of dollars going to a U.S. designated terrorist organization with vast reaches. So what Obama did by not allowing the DEA to do their job is he allowed millions of tons of drugs to get across the border that can be consumed by the citizens, especially going into areas where there's already big drug problems. So that's going to be going there, and then on top of that, you've sent all that money that people had to use to pay for those drugs. All that money got sent overseas to a terrorist organization that Obama should have been trying to stop this whole time. Jesus fucking Christ. The job of the US president is to keep the people safe. Obama willingly let the people in danger and sent that money away so that way he could make his nuclear deal. The nuclear deal was very polarized too, especially at the time. A lot of people were against it for various reasons, but most of the main one that most people are against is saying how Iran had tore up just about every other contract that the US and them had signed and had never honored them. So why would they be expected to honor this one, especially one concerning something like their ability to get nuclear arms? When you're negotiating with a country that has the most nuclear arms in place, if we're looking at this from Iran's point of view, then it would kind of make sense to sort of play ball, make it look like you're playing ball, when in fact you then are building your arsenal supply up, which it almost seems like they've been doing. Because something that Iran has done is there's supposed to be UN or at least US investigators and inspectors that come in to check these facilities, these nuclear facilities. There have been times where the Iranians check it themselves, grab the samples themselves, and send them off to the officials. Well, how do we know that these are legit, that these are taken and these aren't tampered with, that they're not trying to cover the fact that they have been making fuel rods, making plutonium for their warheads? And there have been some evidence of some sites of being sanitized, scrubbed clean, which showed that there was something going on there that they didn't want US officials or UN officials to know about. So essentially, Obama used many of his American citizens as a form of, well, essentially they were casualties inside of Obama's geopolitical agenda. It's really sad to see because drugs can really affect people's lives. They fuck people's lives up now. And up here in Canada, and Ottawa especially, we have a fentanyl crisis. This is literally killing our kids. High school age kids are ODing and dying. I mean, when we look at this in terms of what Obama has done, how many people have died because of this? How many people have overdosed on drugs or have had murdered, let's say, that's a good one. Who's murdered in order to get their fix? Who's stolen in order to get their fix? Who's done terrible things while on their drugs? Who's committed terrible crimes while on their drugs? Everybody, one of those, are a victim of Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. He should have been focusing on Hezbollah. He had plenty of opportunity. He was given plenty of warning that Hezbollah was doing this, but he didn't listen and he didn't act. Just a few of the characters that managed to get away because of the block that Obama kept putting in place, or at some of his administration and some departments were putting in place. One man was Ali Fayyad, and he was for nearly 2 decades in custody by the Czechs. The top Obama administration official declined to apply serious pressure on the Czech government to extradite him to the United States, even as Putin was lobbying aggressively against it. He had been indicted in U.S. courts on charges of planning the murder of U.S. government employees, but he ended up getting sent to Beirut, and he is believed to be back in action selling his weapons in Syria. Then we also have somebody only known as Ghost, and Ghost is one of the biggest cocaine traffickers, including to the US, as well as major supplier of conventional and chemical weapons for use by Syrian President Bashar Assad against his people. This was another person that the DEA and the rest of these agencies couldn't go after because of the blocks put in place. And then probably one of the most infamous of them is Abdullah Saifuddin, which is Hezbollah's longtime envoy to Iran. And he's considered the linchpin of Hezbollah's criminal network. The Justice Department refused to allow investigators to look into him or prosecute him. And then finally, we also have Hezbollah's military wing. They were banned from looking or doing anything with Hezbollah's military wing, which is an ongoing criminal enterprise under a federal mafia-style racketeering statute, blocked by administration and declined to designate Hezbollah a, quote, significant transnational criminal organization, end quote, and blocked other strategic initiatives that would have given the task force additional legal tools, money, and manpower to fight it. Former Obama administration officials said they were guided by broader policy objectives and that some law enforcement efforts were undoubtedly constrained by those concerns. Former officials denied that they derailed any action against Hezbollah or its Iranian allies for political reasons. But that's not really the case, as more people have spoken up. Because again, one thing had to do with this Iran deal, and a lot of people were talking about how desperate Obama was to get this deal. And I think one of the reasons is Obama, one thing that became very clear about him, is that Obama wanted to leave behind a legacy, which he did. And without a doubt, Trump is trying to tear down at every turn. This was going to be part of Obama's legacy. Essentially for him, he thought this was going to be the deal that puts everything right in the Middle East. He thought, or at least that's what he wanted it to look like. He thought this was going to be the deal that takes the teeth away from Iran. And he did this in this area. This is what Obamacare was supposed to be about. And several other areas where he was trying to make his legacy. So everything that Obama did and the way that he handled Hezbollah throughout his campaign, in no doubt in my mind, has to do with him wanting to get this deal across, wanting to get his legacy in place before he left office. Another good area you could definitely see this would have to do with the assassination of Osama bin Laden, because it came out just a few years ago, or it's still... People are still, arguing whether it's true, although it seems to be pretty damn true to me, is that when it came down to what happened with Osama bin Laden, the Pakistanis had him and gave the information to America, told America to wait, I think it was a week, and then they were going to come out and say that they did it together, that Pakistani forces and the American and SEAL Team 6 were the ones who got Osama together. But then as soon as Osama bin Laden was killed, Obama came out to say, we got him. So this is why Obama put so many roadblocks in place for this DEA investigation, this Project Cassandra. He put so many in place because if anything was to possibly put that deal off, then a big part of his legacy would be completely destroyed. In fact, on top of this, one Obama-era Treasury official, Catherine Brower, in little notice written testimony presented last February to the House of Committee on Foreign Affairs, acknowledged that, quote, under the Obama administration, these Hezbollah-related investigations were tamped down for fear of rocking the boat with Iran and jeopardizing the nuclear deal, end quote. The final agreement for this nuclear deal was introduced on January 7, 2016, or at least it was the final agreement, it wasn't implemented yet. But then within months of this happening, the task force that was taking care of Project Cassandra, it was completely dead. Everything was gone. All the resources were gone. All the leads were gone. This can be explained by one quote by one man who used to work on the task force called Asher. He says, quote, the closer we got to the Iran deal, the more these activities went away. So much of the capability, whether it was special operations, whether it was law enforcement, whether it was treasury designation, even the capacity, the personnel assigned to this mission, it was assiduously drained almost to the last drop by the end of the Obama administration. As a result, the U.S. government lost insight into not only drug trafficking and other criminal activity worldwide, but also into Hezbollah's illicit conspiracies with top officials in the Iranian, Syrian, Venezuelan, and Russian governments, all the way up to President Nicolas Maduro, Assad, and Putin, according to former task force members and other current and former U.S. officials. And probably one of the worst things that ended up happening out of this is the money that was being laundered through this giant scheme by Hezbollah. The money was being used to kill American soldiers. During the Iraq War, there was an IED, an improvised explosive device that they called, explosive form penetrator. And it was the armor-piercing charge were so powerful that they were ripping M1 Abrams tanks apart. This was being used by Iraqi Shiite militia members in order to take out the American soldiers that were over there at the time. As they began looking into the cash flows, where this was coming from, they managed to trace it back that Hezbollah was using the money through this car deals and drug scheme, this worldwide drug scheme that they were doing. They were using the funds from that in order to pay for these IEDs, get them into the hands of these Shiite militia members, and then that's when they were planted in place. This resulted in the death of hundreds of U.S. military personnel. This was all funded by Hezbollah during the Iraq War. What seems to be very clear about this, from this whole thing, is that throughout this scheme that Hezbollah is running, it seems they are indirectly attacking America. They are using their connections, they are using this scheme in order to get drugs into America and attack its population through that way, while then reaping the benefits of the monetary reward. And on top of this, they are then trying to present themselves as victims in the situation in the Middle East in order to get worldwide sympathy for them, which happened a lot under Obama. They present Israel as the enemy, Israel as being the problem. And a lot of people are willing to go along with that. But as we can see, Hezbollah is running a covert drug operation to get into America. They're using Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico in order to get smuggling these drugs in. And in fact, as we've watched, the numbers have continued to grow. The amount of drugs going in, the amount of money that is being sent back to Hezbollah. But time and time again, despite the warnings, Obama did nothing. And as it says here, it says, by early 2009, Obama's national security team battled down Project Cassandra's increasingly urgent warnings as being overly alarmist, counterproductive, or untrue, or simply ignored them, according to Kelly, Asher, Malls, and other participants in and out of government, and many of those participated inside of Project Cassandra. But by following the money, though, Asher had become convinced that the task force wasn't overhyping the threat posed by Hezbollah criminal activity. It was significantly underestimating it, because Hezbollah's drug trafficking was bankrolling its Islamic jihadist military wing and joint ventures with Iran, as Asher would later testify before Congress. It represented, quote, the largest material support scheme for terrorist operations, end quote, the world had ever seen. Eventually, it came out that the Beirut-based Lebanese Canadian bank was also holding back billions of dollars of this money. They were laundering it for Hezbollah in order for them to finance this. Whatever their operation happened to be, whether it was the IEDs or whether the ongoing drug operation, they're the ones that have been laundering the money. Project Cassandra managed to trace a lot of the money from these car dealerships and a lot of the money that was going through the drug traffickers all the way back to this bank. And because of this, it came out that there are some dealerships that are being owned and operated inside the U.S. that are fronts for Hezbollah and their group in order to sell their drugs, their cars, and launder the money. It's all part of the scheme. This is all part of the way you clean the money before it gets back and you put it back into circulation. So you have your dirty money, you got to get it clean. There's a way to do that, and it's through legitimate business. And that's why these dealerships are in place inside the U.S. It's a base of operation for these people to work inside the U.S. and make the sales and then launder that money and send that money back to this bank. Now, when this came out, federal authorities filed a civil action suit against the bank in February 2011 and later seized $102 million, ultimately forcing it to shut down and sell its assets without admitting wrongdoing. But the Justice Department never filed the criminal charges and also stymied investigation into other financial institutions and individuals of that task force agent targeted as part of the planned RICO case. The Obama White House said privately that it feared a broader assault on Lebanese financial institution would destabilize the country. Soon afterwards, one of the agents that worked for Project Cassandra, his name was Kelly, said he ran into one of the unit's top prosecutors and asked if there was something going on in the White House that would explain why we can't get criminal filings. He ended up saying, quote, "You don't know the half of it. Right now, we have 50 FBI agents not doing anything because they know their Iran cases aren't going anywhere." And it turned out that after 2012, when Obama won re-election in office, he even took an even more overt attempt at bringing down and stamping out this investigation into Hezbollah. So he even ramped it up after he got back into office. Maybe that's an increase in confidence or something, I'm not sure. But what was clear is by the end of all this, Obama refused to act in order to stem Hezbollah's actions. He's allowed the flow of drugs in order to come in. He's allowed the flow of money to go back to Hezbollah, and he has allowed Hezbollah to grow. And he did this in the name of furthering his legacy, and he made all sorts of concessions that he never should have. Mostly during the Iran nuclear deal, he made concessions that they never should have. And because of this, Hezbollah has become a massive terrorist organization, a massive drug organization worldwide that is targeting the US. This seems to be maybe where a large part of our drug problem has come from over these last decade or two. It has to do with Hezbollah putting the drugs in there to try and fuck with America and everybody in the West. Obama's legacy had not been looking good as of recent, especially the way that Trump had been trying to tear it down. But this is just damning evidence of the President of the United States more or less willingly allowing Hezbollah to do this for his own personal image, his own personal glory. That's gotta be one of the worst things Obama could have done in office. And I gotta say, I was never an anti-Obama person for this, and I'm still not. But holy shit, it definitely makes you lose a lot. If you had respect for the guy, it makes you lose a lot for him when you hear this sort of stories coming out. So it appears that this Christmas time was not a good time for leaders in the West. For Canada and America, Trudeau was found guilty by ethics commissioner, and Obama's legacy gets torn down just even more, and quite roughly by Politico, as this all gets exposed. But this needs to be exposed. This is the sort of thing we need to hear about. So I'm glad that this report did come out of Politico, but damn, it really does hurt Obama's image. I want to thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. I hope you all had a great Christmas and hope you all have a great New Year, and I'll see you in 2018.